June 19, 1944. Task Force 58 sails 200 miles west of the Mariana Islands. The USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, USS Bunker Hill, USS Yorktown, and 11 other carriers launch Grumman F6F Hellcat fighters toward the approaching Japanese fleet. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher commands the American carrier force from his flagship, the Lexington. There are 15 floating airfields carrying 905 aircraft against Imperial Japan's desperate attempt to stop the American advance toward its homeland. What the Japanese naval aviators will discover this morning will destroy their understanding of aerial combat. Second Lieutenant Sakio Komatsu adjusts his flight suit in the ready room aboard the carrier Taiho at 07:30. The morning briefing emphasized maximum strike force against the American carriers detected east of Guam. Intelligence reports indicate 15 large carriers operating in 3 task groups southwest of Saipan. Komatsu prepares to fly in the escort for the second attack wave, which promises to deal a decisive blow against the American invasion fleet. His aircraft carries a disposable centerline fuel tank, extending its range to over 1,000 nautical miles, transforming the agile fighter into a long-range escort platform. The attack doctrine emerged from Japan's successful operations in 1941 and 1942. Carrier-based attacks against Pearl Harbor, Darwin, and others achieved devastating results through coordinated strikes by experienced pilots flying superior aircraft. Commander Minoru Genda developed tactics that maximize the Zero's exceptional maneuverability and range advantages against Allied opposition. The concept is based on exploiting the Zero's ability to perform tighter turns than any enemy fighter while maintaining greater combat endurance than American aircraft. A skilled pilot could dominate aerial engagements through superior positioning and energy management, regardless of numerical disadvantage. Task Force 58 represents the most powerful deployment of carriers by America since the start of the war. The 15 carriers include 6 Essex-class vessels, displacing 27,000 tons each, with reinforced flight decks designed to operate heavier aircraft. This construction philosophy differs fundamentally from Japanese carriers, with their lightweight structures optimized for maximum aircraft capacity. American designers prioritize durability and damage control over pure numbers, accepting a reduced speed in exchange for greater survivability against enemy attacks. The Boer F6F Hellcat entered service in late 1943 as a direct response to combat experience against the Zero. Grumman engineers designed the aircraft specifically to counter Japanese fighters, using lessons learned from captured specimens of the Zero and pilot reports. The Hellcat weighs approximately 12,000 lbs loaded, with a 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double-wasp engine, providing a maximum speed of 380 mph. Armor protection includes 212 lbs of steel plates, protecting the pilot, the oil cooler, and the oil tank. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevent catastrophic fires caused by enemy fire. 650 caliber Browning machine guns, with 400 rounds per gun, provide firepower that exceeds the armament of any Japanese fighter. The Japanese formation launched from the carriers Taiho, Shokaku, and Zuikaku includes 128 aircraft, approaching Task Force 58 from the west at an altitude of 24,000 feet. The pilots observed no American aircraft during their initial approach, suggesting tactical surprise against the enemy fleet. Many pilots in the formation completed their training only a few months prior, with less than 100 total flying hours. The accelerated training program condensed what previously required 3 years into just 6 months, due to the increasing losses of pilots throughout 1943. Basic combat maneuvers received minimal attention, while navigation and formation flying occupied the majority of the training hours. carrier landing practice averaged only 5 successful landings before operational deployment. Lieutenant Colonel Tishi Yamamoto represents one of the few remaining experienced pilots, with over 600 combat hours accumulated since 1941. His experience includes missions over the Dutch East Indies and Rabaul, where Japanese naval aviation previously dominated encounters. The Zero's reputation for invincibility remained intact until 1942, despite growing Allied resistance. However, the Guadalcanal campaign revealed worrying trends as American pilots developed effective counter-tactics against the previously unstoppable Japanese fighters. The thatch-weave defensive maneuver negated the Zero's turn advantage, while hit-and-run attacks exploited its lack of armor protection. Ensign Hiroshi Tanaka flies as Yamamoto's wingman, having graduated from abbreviated flight training only 10 weeks prior. His total flight time amounts to 75 hours, with only theoretical knowledge of aerial combat tactics. The fuel shortage forced the elimination of advanced combat training, while the lack of ammunition limited target practice to static ground targets. Most new pilots never fired their weapons at moving aerial targets before entering combat. The contrast between veterans and replacements creates severe tactical limitations within the Japanese formations. Experienced pilots must simultaneously engage enemy fighters while protecting inexperienced wingmen who lack situational awareness. This burden reduces the overall effectiveness of the formation, as veterans cannot fully exploit their skills while guiding novices through their first combat experiences. American radar operators aboard the USS Yorktown detect the Japanese formation 150 miles away, providing a 20-minute early warning before visual contact. Fighter director officers guide the combat air patrol fighters to specific interception coordinates using precise radar plotting. This technological advantage transforms air defense from a reactive takeoff into a coordinated interception, with altitude and positioning advantages. The fighter direction system represents a revolutionary command and control capability developed through 2 years of combat experience. Each carrier maintains a combat information center where trained officers track all aerial contacts using radar displays. Radio communications link the directors to the fighters in the air, providing real-time tactical guidance during engagements. This centralized control maximizes defensive efficiency by concentrating fighters at ideal interception points. Commander David McCampbell leads the 1st Division of VF-15 from the USS Essex, climbing toward the enemy attack at military power. His 12 Hellcats maintain a tight formation while following radar vectors toward the designated targets. Each pilot has an average of more than 300 flying hours, with extensive tactical and gunnery training completed in the United States. The American training program expanded dramatically throughout 1943, producing 10,000 new naval aviators annually. Operational training units provided 500 total flying hours, including 150 hours in combat aircraft types. Advanced fighter training emphasized deflection shooting, energy management, and coordinated team tactics against dissimilar aircraft, simulating enemy capabilities. The Hellcat's design philosophy prioritizes pilot survival through comprehensive protection systems. Armor plates surround the cockpit, including the seatback, headrest, and floor panels, totaling more than 200 lbs. The bulletproof windshield consists of 1.5 inches of laminated glass capable of stopping 7.7 mm projectiles at point-blank range. Self-sealing fuel tanks use multiple layers of rubber that expand when punctured, preventing fuel leaks and fires. The robust structure resists significant battle damage while maintaining structural integrity. Test flights demonstrated the Hellcat's ability to absorb multiple 20 mm on cannon impacts while remaining controllable. This durability provides Psychological confidence, as pilots know their aircraft can survive encounters that would destroy enemy fighters. The Japanese formation encounters the first Hellcats at 09:15, approximately 90 miles west of Guam. The American fighters attack from above and behind, using their altitude advantage for high-speed diving passes. Ensign Tanaka turns to the left, trying to force a direct pass from the enemy, but the Hellcat follows his curve with surprising agility. The superior power of the American fighter allows for sustained turns at speeds where the Zero's controls become heavy and unresponsive. Multiple .50 caliber projectiles hit Tanaka's aircraft, cutting control cables and puncturing fuel tanks that ignite immediately. The Zero's lack of armor protection proves catastrophic, as armor-piercing and incendiary projectiles penetrate the thin aluminum structure. Tanaka's aircraft explodes when the flames reach the wing fuel tanks, demonstrating the Zero's vulnerability to concentrated firepower. This shocking destruction contradicts everything the Japanese pilots believed about their aircraft's combat superiority. The psychological impact spreads through the formation as pilots witness their fighters being destroyed with apparent ease. Commander McCampbell's division executes coordinated slashing attacks against the Japanese formation using superior speed and firepower. The Hellcats dive from 28,000 feet, reaching 450 meticulous in their attack runs before quickly climbing back to altitude. This energy-based tactical approach negates the Zero's maneuverability advantage while exploiting its inferior high-speed handling characteristics. The Japanese pilots attempt traditional turning engagements but cannot force the Americans into sustained dogfights. Each Hellcat pilot maintains strict energy discipline, refusing to enter low-speed turning battles where Zeros excel. The Americans demonstrate remarkable teamwork, with wingmen protecting leaders during attack runs, maintaining mutual support throughout the engagement. This coordination reflects the extensive tactical training of multiple aircraft, emphasizing section and division tactics over individual combat. The Hellcat's robust radio equipment allows for clear communications, despite electromagnetic interference from dozens of simultaneous transmissions. The Japanese pilots struggle with inferior radio systems that produce static and noise, preventing effective tactical coordination. Many Zero pilots disable their radios entirely due to the constant interference, relying on hand signals and previously agreed-upon formations. This breakdown in communication aggravates the tactical disadvantages as Japanese formations fragment under coordinated American attacks. The first engagement ends with severe Japanese losses, with 12 Zeros falling to the Hellcat's guns in 8 minutes. The American pilots observe multiple characteristics that contradict intelligence estimates of enemy capabilities. The Japanese fighters demonstrate poor aim, with most bursts passing harmlessly behind the intended targets. Their evasive maneuvers follow predictable patterns, suggesting inadequate combat training and a limited tactical repertoire. Several Japanese pilots abandon advantageous positions due to apparent confusion or inexperience, failing to exploit brief opportunities when the Hellcats present vulnerable aspects. Lieutenant Alexander Vrasiu of VF-16 aboard the Lexington intercepts a second Japanese formation attempting to penetrate the fighter screen. His section of 4 Hellcats engages 12 enemy aircraft with devastating effectiveness, shooting down 6 planes in 8 minutes. Vrasiu expends only 360 rounds from his 2,400-round ammunition load, demonstrating the effectiveness of American gunnery training. The concentrated firepower of the .50 caliber machine guns proves overwhelming against the Zero's fragile structure. Short bursts produce immediate catastrophic damage, with wings separating, engines exploding, and fuel tanks igniting due to incendiary projectiles. The technological disparity becomes increasingly apparent as the battle develops throughout the morning. The Hellcats absorb multiple impacts from the Japanese 7.7 mm machine guns without significant damage, while their own weapons destroy the Zeros with minimal ammunition expenditure. American pilots report enemy aircraft disintegrating under concentrated fire, often exploding after only 2 or 3 seconds of precise shooting. The Zero's 20 mm cannons represent a theoretical threat, but the low muzzle velocity and limited ammunition reduce their practical effectiveness. Most Japanese pilots exhaust their cannon ammunition quickly due to poor fire discipline, leaving only rifle-caliber machine guns for subsequent engagements. Radar-directed fighter control allows for efficient vector management as American fighters intercept multiple attack waves. Fighter direction officers maintain complete tactical awareness through radar tracking and pilot reports, positioning fresh fighters at ideal interception points. This systematic defense system prevents Japanese formations from coordinating mass attacks against the carrier force. Individual Japanese groups arrive in a disorganized manner, encountering concentrated formations of Hellcats positioned for maximum tactical advantage. The invaders suffer progressive attrition before reaching the effective attack range of the American vessels. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launches his second wave at 08:56, comprising 128 aircraft from all available carriers. The attack includes 48 Zero fighters, 53 Judy dive bombers, and 27 Jill torpedo bombers tasked with overwhelming American defenses through pure numbers. However, the inexperienced pilots struggle with basic navigation, as formations fragment during the long approach flight. Several groups get entirely lost, wandering aimlessly while consuming precious fuel reserves before finding their targets. Lieutenant Russell Reiserer of VF-31, aboard the USS Cabot, intercepts the leading elements of the second wave 60 miles from the task force. His division of Hellcats attacks coming from the direction of the sun, achieving complete tactical surprise against the enemy formation. The Japanese pilots failed to maintain proper lookout doctrine, allowing the Americans to approach undetected until opening fire. In a few minutes, 5 enemy aircraft spiral toward the ocean, leaving trails of smoke and flames due to catastrophic structural damage. The surviving Japanese aircraft attempt to continue their attack run, but encounter successive formations of Hellcats positioned at different altitudes. Each American interception follows similar patterns, with diving attacks from a superior altitude, followed by rapid climbs back to lookout positions. The Hellcats maintain the energy advantage during engagements, dictating the terms of combat while denying Japanese pilots opportunities for effective retaliation. This tactical dominance reflects the superior performance of the aircraft combined with extensive energy management training that maximizes the Hellcats' advantages. Japanese pilots trained for close-range maneuvering combat find themselves unable to engage effectively at high speeds, where the Zero becomes impossible to maneuver. The second wave's attack on Task Force 58 achieves minimal results, while survivors penetrate the fighter screen in scattered groups. Anti-aircraft fire from the screening destroyers and cruisers creates dense barrage patterns that further disperse the attack formations. The few Japanese aircraft that reach the carriers encounter concentrated defensive fire from multiple ships, firing proximity-fused shells. Only one torpedo bomber successfully launches its weapon, which the USS Indiana easily avoids through timely maneuvers. Commander McCampbell, leading the second attack of VF-15, encounters the third Japanese wave at 11 fours. His formation of 12 Hellcats engages more than 40 enemy aircraft in a continuous battle that lasts 20 minutes. McCampbell personally destroys 7 Japanese planes, while his wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, accounts for 4 additional victories. The engagement demonstrates the cumulative effect of American training advantages, as experienced pilots exploit every enemy mistake. Japanese formations dissolve into individual aircraft maneuvering defensively, abandoning their attack mission to survive the overwhelming fighter opposition. Lieutenant Commander Kenji Suzuki observes the destruction of the third wave from his damaged Zero, struggling to return to the Japanese fleet. His aircraft shows multiple 50-caliber holes in the wings and fuselage, with a severed elevator cable and the engine failing. The severe losses exceed anything experienced in previous carrier battles, including Midway, where at least some aircraft successfully attacked enemy ships. Today's operations achieve practically nothing while losing dozens of aircraft and irreplaceable pilots to enemy fighters. The intelligence failure becomes apparent as returning pilots report having encountered an entirely new American fighter, with unprecedented performance characteristics. Previous intelligence estimates, based on captured F4F Wildcats, suggested that American fighters remained inferior to updated variants of the Zero in all performance parameters except diving speed. The Hellcat's ability to climb faster, make tighter turns at high speed, and absorb tremendous damage contradicts every assumption underlying Japanese tactical planning. The enemy fighter seems built specifically to exploit every weakness of the Zero, while denying its traditional advantages. Aboard the Taiho, Admiral Ozawa receives fragmentary reports indicating catastrophic losses among the three attack waves. Surviving pilots describe overwhelming fighter opposition, with American aircraft appearing at every altitude and direction. The coordinated defensive system prevents the concentration of attack forces, while achieving a disproportionate attrition against the Japanese formations. Radio interceptions suggest that American losses remain minimal, despite engaging superior numbers of Japanese aircraft during the morning operations. Air operations officers aboard the Japanese carriers count the mounting casualties as aircraft fail to return from their missions. The first wave launched 69 aircraft, but only 27 returned to their carriers, many of them with significant battle damage. The second wave suffers even more, with only a third of the 128 aircraft surviving the gauntlet of American fighters. These losses represent not only aircraft, but irreplaceable pilots whose training required years of development in peacetime. The implications extend beyond the immediate tactical defeat to the strategic collapse of Japanese naval aviation capability. Returning pilots exhibit signs of severe psychological trauma after the encounter with American fighters. Young aviators who graduated from training only weeks before describe terror and helplessness when facing an enemy that seems invulnerable to their attacks. Their 7.7mm machine guns seem completely ineffective, while the American 50 calibers tear their aircraft apart with devastating efficiency. The myth of the Zero's invincibility shatters completely, as pilots witness squadron mates being destroyed without the opportunity for effective resistance. Veteran pilots like Yamamoto struggle to understand the reversal of air superiority they enjoyed during the early years of the war. The tactical methods developed through successful campaigns in China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific no longer work against this new American fighter. Years of combat experience become insignificant when the enemy refuses engagement on the terms in which the Japanese pilots excel. The psychological base of Japanese naval aviation, built on technical superiority and pilot skill, collapses in a single morning of combat. Morale aboard the Japanese carriers plummets as maintenance crews count the empty parking spots where aircraft should have returned. The flight decks, designed to operate 75 aircraft each, now hold scattered remains of once powerful air groups. Mechanics and armorers who prepared the aircraft for the morning attacks remain idle, without machines to fix or weapons to load. The human dimension of the defeat becomes apparent as friends and squadron mates do not return from what promised to be a decisive victory. Admiral Ozawa contemplates the implications of continuing operations with drastically reduced air groups. The fourth wave of 82 aircraft was prepared for launch, but reconnaissance reports indicate that American carriers maintain full combat capacity, despite 3 mass attacks. The sacrifice of additional pilots and aircraft seems useless against an enemy that demonstrates overwhelming tactical and technical superiority. However, the withdrawal abandons the Saipan garrison and acknowledges defeat in what Japanese planners considered the decisive battle for Pacific supremacy. The breakdown in communication between senior commanders and flight personnel becomes critical, as an accurate assessment of the battle proves impossible. Surviving pilots provide conflicting reports on enemy strength and capabilities, while staff officers struggle to compile a coherent tactical analysis. The traditional Japanese emphasis on spiritual determination over material factors prevents an honest evaluation of American advantages. Many commanders refused to admit that enemy fighters could so completely dominate their naval aviators, regardless of numerical superiority. The dominance of the F6F Hellcat comes from comprehensive design advantages that address all aspects of aerial combat. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine produces 2,000 horsepower, nearly double the 130 horsepower of the U-0's Sakai 21 engine. This power advantage translates into superior climb rate, acceleration, and performance at high altitude, where thin air reduces the Zero's already marginal power-to-weight ratio. The Hellcat climbs at 3,500 feet per minute, compared to the Zero's 2,600 feet per minute, allowing American pilots to maintain the energy advantage during engagements. The Hellcat's armament of 650 caliber Browning machine guns with an ample load of 400 rounds per gun provides devastating firepower with excellent ballistic characteristics. Each machine gun fires 850 rounds per minute, with a muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second, maintaining a flat trajectory and impact power at combat ranges. The total firepower exceeds 100 rounds per second of armor-piercing and incendiary ammunition, capable of penetrating engine blocks and igniting fuel tanks. The ammunition supply provides 30 seconds of sustained fire, allowing for multiple engagement opportunities without concern for ammunition conservation. The Zero's armament combines two 20mm Type 99 cannons with two 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns, presenting theoretical firepower advantages through explosive cannon shells. However, the cannon's low muzzle velocity of 2,460 feet per second creates a significant trajectory drop, requiring different aiming points than the machine guns. The limited ammunition of 60 rounds per cannon forces pilots to conserve fire, reducing the practical rate of fire during prolonged engagements. The 7.7mm machine guns lack stopping power against armored American fighters, while their 700 rounds per gun fail to compensate for insufficient penetration capacity. American radar technology provides decisive tactical advantages through early warning and fighter direction capabilities. The SK Air Search Radar detects aircraft at a 100-mile range, while the SM Height Finding Radar determines altitude with an accuracy of 500 feet. This information feeds the combat information centers, where trained officers plot all contacts on vertical display boards. Fighter director officers guide the defense fighters using VHF radio equipment, providing clear communications despite atmospheric interference. The integrated system transforms air defense from individual pilot initiative into coordinated tactical operations, maximizing defensive efficiency. Japanese carriers lack effective radar systems, with most vessels relying on visual observation for the coordination of air defense. The Type 21 air search radar installed on some carriers provides only 60 miles detection range with poor reliability and frequent false contacts. Without height-finding capability or integrated fighter direction, Japanese combat air patrols operate independently using pre-war tactical doctrine. The absence of centralized control prevents efficient fighter allocation against multiple incoming raids while limiting tactical flexibility during engagements. By late 1944, a new Japanese Navy pilot graduated with just 40 hours flying time, while his American opponent had at least 525 hours flying time. American pilots average extensive gunnery training with camera guns recording accuracy during simulated combat. Formation tactics receive equal emphasis with pilots learning energy management, mutual support, and section tactics during advanced training. Operational training units provide realistic combat preparation using experienced instructors rotating from frontline squadrons. Japanese replacement pilots have an average of only 100 total flight hours, with minimal combat training before operational deployment. Fuel shortages force a reliance on ground instruction and limited flight hours in obsolete training aircraft. Most pilots never fire their weapons at aerial targets before entering combat, while formation flying emphasizes parade precision rather than tactical flexibility. The abbreviated training program eliminates aerobatics, instrument flying, and night operations, which were considered essential in the pre-war curriculum. The qualitative difference in pilot capability amplifies aircraft performance disparities during aerial combat. The fourth Japanese wave takes off despite mounting evidence of catastrophic losses in previous attacks. Admiral Ozawa commits his remaining 82 aircraft, hoping to inflict some damage on the American carriers before withdrawing to the west. However, these aircraft encounter even more intense fighter opposition as the American carriers recover, refuel, and relaunch their combat air patrols. The systematic destruction continues with mechanical precision, while Hellcats positioned at multiple altitudes engage each approaching group. At 14:30, American search aircraft locate the Japanese fleet 275 miles west-northwest of Task Force 58. Admiral Mitcher launches a maximum effort attack with 216 aircraft, despite the extreme range requiring careful fuel management. The American strike includes 85 Hellcat fighters, demonstrating offensive capability beyond pure fleet defense roles. While the Japanese carriers struggle to maintain minimal defensive patrols with surviving aircraft, the American carriers project overwhelming offensive power. The reversal of roles, from the morning's defensive success to the afternoon's offensive operations, demonstrates American operational superiority. The American attack finds the Japanese carriers virtually defenseless, with only 35 operational fighters remaining, from the more than 400 aircraft available that morning. Hellcat fighters sweep away the symbolic resistance, while dive bombers and torpedo planes attack without significant interference. The carrier Hiyo sinks after multiple torpedo hits, while the Zuikaku and Chiyoda suffer severe damage from bomb attacks. Japanese anti-aircraft fire proves ineffective against coordinated attacks carried out with determination by experienced American pilots. The return flight occurs after sunset, creating navigation challenges as pilots struggle to locate their carriers in the darkness. Admiral Mitcher makes the unprecedented decision to illuminate his carriers despite submarine threats, turning on searchlights and deck lights to guide the returning aircraft. This calculated risk prioritizes the recovery of aircrews over the safety of the ships, demonstrating American confidence in their tactical position. Despite losing 80 aircraft to lack of fuel and night landing accidents, personnel recovery reaches 85%, with destroyers rescuing pilots from the water. The operational tempo continues as the carriers prepare for dawn searches to locate the retreating Japanese fleet. Admiral Ozawa's withdrawal acknowledges complete defeat, with only 35 operational aircraft remaining from the 430 embarked that morning. The Japanese fleet that entered the battle expecting a decisive victory retreats, having accomplished nothing other than confirming American air supremacy. The loss ratio exceeds to 10-1 in favor of American forces, with Japanese naval aviation effectively eliminated as an offensive force. The implications extend beyond the immediate tactical defeat, as Japan lacks the resources to rebuild carrier air groups before American forces approach the home islands. The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrates that technological superiority combined with superior training can completely nullify enemy tactical doctrine, regardless of determination or experience. Japanese naval aviation built its reputation with superior aircraft and extensively trained pilots, achieving decisive victories throughout 1941 and 1942. The Zero fighter dominated all opponents through exceptional maneuverability and range, while pilots accumulated combat experience in multiple campaigns. This combination created a psychological supremacy, where Allied pilots entered combat expecting defeat against Japanese fighters. The introduction of the Hellcat completely reverses this dynamic through a purpose-built design, specifically countering Japanese advantages. American designers accepted the weight increase for armor and self-sealing tanks, creating an aircraft that survived damage that destroyed Zeros instantly. The powerful engine provided performance margins, allowing pilots to dictate the terms of the engagement while avoiding situations where Zeros excelled. The massive firepower of the 50 caliber machine guns overcame the structures of Japanese aircraft, designed for minimum weight rather than resistance to battle damage. The expansion of the American training system demonstrates the triumph of industrial-age warfare over the artisanal tradition. While Japan struggled to train hundreds of replacement pilots using abbreviated programs, America trained thousands using a systematic curriculum developed through operational analysis. The assembly line approach to pilot production achieved consistent quality through standardized instruction and extensive flight hours. Each American pilot represented an interchangeable component in the naval aviation system, rather than an irreplaceable individual whose loss paralyzed the unit's effectiveness. The radar-directed fighter control system exemplifies technological force multiplication beyond the individual capabilities of the aircraft. The ability to position fighters optimally before visual contact nullifies Japanese tactical surprise while maximizing defensive efficiency. This systematic approach to air defense transforms carrier task forces from vulnerable targets into almost impregnable fortresses against conventional air attacks. The integration of sensors, communications, and command functions creates synergistic capabilities that exceed the sum of the individual components. The failure of Japanese naval doctrine to adapt to changing circumstances proves fatal when pre-war assumptions meet wartime reality. The emphasis on offensive operations using carrier-based aviation to achieve decisive victory through a single engagement becomes irrelevant against an enemy that refuses such terms. American forces accept gradual attrition through sustained operations rather than seeking decisive battles for theater supremacy. This operational patience, combined with industrial superiority, ensures eventual victory regardless of the outcomes of individual engagements. The human cost extends beyond aircraft and pilots to the institutional knowledge accumulated through years of training and combat experience. Japan's pre-war naval aviators represented an elite cadre whose skills required extensive development through rigorous selection and training. Their loss cannot be replaced through abbreviated wartime programs that produce pilots with minimal competence rather than excellence. The qualitative decline becomes self-reinforcing as inexperienced pilots suffer disproportionate losses, further degrading the overall effectiveness of the force. Task Force 58 continues operations at Saipan, despite Japanese attempts to disrupt the invasion through carrier-based aviation. The morning of June 20th brings renewed searches for the retreating Japanese fleet, maintaining defensive patrols against potential land-based attacks. American pilots who survived yesterday's combat described the experience as just like an old-time turkey shoot, giving the battle its enduring nickname. The term captures both the one-sided nature of the aerial combat and the mechanical efficiency of the destruction of Japanese aircraft. The final tally reveals the catastrophic scale of the Japanese defeat, with 445 aircraft destroyed, including 395 carrier planes and approximately 50 land-based aircraft. American losses total 123 aircraft, with 80 falling to operational accidents rather than enemy action. Only 43 American planes fall to Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire during 2 days of intense aerial combat. The exchange ratio of 10-to-1 exceeds any previous carrier battle, including the decisive American victory at Midway. More significantly, Japan loses more than 400 pilots, including instructors recalled from training units, representing the last reservoir of experienced naval aviators. Admiral Ozawa's report to Combined Fleet Headquarters acknowledges the effective destruction of Japanese carrier aviation as an offensive force. The surviving carriers possess ships and aircraft, but lack trained pilots capable of conducting effective operations against American forces. The mobile fleet that set out expecting to achieve a decisive victory returns, having demonstrated only American air supremacy. The strategic implications become apparent as American forces continue advancing toward Japan without significant aerial opposition from the Imperial Navy. The technological revolution in naval warfare demonstrated in the Philippine Sea influences the development of post-war aviation worldwide. The integration of radar communications and fighter control establishes standards followed by all major navies seeking carrier aviation capability. The emphasis on pilot survival through aircraft protection and systematic training becomes standard practice, replacing the acceptance of pre-war attrition. The Hellcat itself continues serving during the Korean War, adapted for ground attack missions that exploit its robust construction and heavy armament. American industrial superiority proves ultimately decisive through advantages of quantity and quality that overwhelm Japanese forces, regardless of tactical innovation or individual courage. The ability to produce thousands of aircraft monthly while training pilots to operate them effectively creates an insurmountable numerical superiority. Each American loss can be replaced several times over, while Japanese losses become a permanent degradation of combat capability. Production statistics reveal the hopelessness of Japan's position. America produces 96,000 aircraft in 1944, while Japan manages only 28,000, despite total national mobilization. The Hellcat achieves the highest kill rate of any American fighter, with 5,223 confirmed kills against 270 losses in aerial combat. This 19-to-1 ratio exceeds all other aircraft types, accounting for 75% of all Navy aerial victories despite having entered service halfway through the war. The F6F validates the design philosophy, prioritizing pilot survival and firepower over pure performance metrics. Veterans consistently praise the Hellcat's docile flight characteristics and its ability to absorb battle damage while maintaining combat effectiveness. Japanese naval aviation never recovers from the Marianas disaster, being relegated to desperate kamikaze attacks that sacrifice pilots and aircraft for minimal strategic impact. The institutional knowledge accumulated through decades of development disappears in a single day of combat against superior American forces. The Zero fighter that symbolized Japanese air supremacy becomes synonymous with obsolescence and vulnerability against modern American fighters. The psychological impact extends beyond military defeat to the national recognition that spiritual determination cannot overcome material inferiority against the arsenal of industrial democracy. The Battle of the Philippine Sea represents the culmination of American naval aviation development, from the disaster of Pearl Harbor to the methodical construction of overwhelming superiority. The carrier task forces that Japan attacked in 1941, expecting to eliminate the American presence in the Pacific, return multiplied by 10 with superior aircraft, pilots, and tactical doctrine. The transformation from a desperate defense to offensive supremacy occurs through the systematic application of industrial resources, technological innovation, and operational analysis. The Hellcat fighter embodies this evolution, from the reactive response to the Japanese initiative toward purposeful dominance through superior design and employment. Admiral Mitcher's after-action report emphasizes the totality of the American victory, while acknowledging the fortunate circumstances that concentrated Japanese attacks against prepared defenses. The combination of radar warning, fighter direction, and superior aircraft creates perfect conditions for defensive success against conventional air attacks. However, he warns that future enemies may develop asymmetrical responses that require continuous innovation rather than reliance on proven formulas. This prescient observation anticipates the kamikaze phenomenon that emerges from Japan's desperate attempts to compensate for conventional inferiority. The individual experiences of pilots reveal the human dimension beyond the statistical abstractions of victory and defeat. American pilots describe the surreal experience of shooting down multiple enemy aircraft with minimal effort, while feeling sympathy for opponents flying obsolete aircraft with inadequate training. Japanese survivors report the horror of watching squadron mates being destroyed without the opportunity for effective resistance against an enemy that seems invulnerable. These personal narratives capture the essential tragedy of war, where technological superiority translates into human suffering, regardless of individual courage or determination. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot enters aviation history as a demonstration of American air supremacy achieved through systematic superiority in training, technology, and tactical doctrine. The battle proves that modern warfare rewards industrial capacity and scientific advancement over warrior tradition and spiritual determination. Japan's attempt to achieve decisive victory through conventional carrier aviation ends in a catastrophic defeat that eliminates its naval aviation as an effective force. The Imperial Navy that dominated the Pacific in 1942 becomes incapable of significant offensive operations by June 1944. The strategic consequences extend beyond the immediate military defeat to a fundamental reassessment of the nature of war in the industrial age. Japan's military leadership must confront the reality that its nation lacks the resources to compete with American production capacity, regardless of tactical innovation. The decision to continue fighting, despite the mathematical certainty of defeat, reflects a cultural inability to accept surrender rather than a rational strategic calculation. The kamikaze phenomenon emerges from this cognitive dissonance between accepting the inevitability of defeat and refusing its implications. The sinking of the carriers Shokaku and Taiho by American submarines on June 19 compounds the aerial defeat with losses of irreplaceable platforms. The Shokaku, a veteran of Pearl Harbor and all major carrier battles except Midway, succumbs to torpedoes from the USS Kavala while refueling aircraft. The Taiho, Japan's newest and most advanced carrier with an armored flight deck, sinks from a single torpedo hit that causes catastrophic vapor explosions. These losses eliminate not just ships, but the institutional experience of their crews, which cannot be replaced before the end of the war. The technological and training advantages demonstrated during the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot establish standards that continue for the remainder of the Pacific War. American forces advance inexorably toward Japan, while Japanese forces attempt increasingly desperate defensive measures without significant success. The carrier task forces that seemed vulnerable to Japanese attack in 1941 become unstoppable instruments of American power projection in 1944. The transformation from defensive response to offensive supremacy occurs through the methodical application of the advantages of industrial democracy against the limitations of military autocracies. The post-battle period sees American carriers continuing operations at Saipan, while Japanese survivors retreat to anchorages beyond the reach of American aircraft. The invasion proceeds without significant interference from Japanese naval aviation, which ceases to exist as an effective force. Airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam soon house B-29 bombers that take strategic bombing to the Japanese home islands. The carrier battle intended to prevent this outcome instead confirms the American ability to project power wherever its national strategy requires, regardless of Japanese opposition. Veterans of the Battle of the Philippine Sea remember the morning of June 19, 1944, as the day American naval aviation achieved unquestionable supremacy over its Japanese opponents. The months of preparation, training, and technological development culminate in a few hours of aerial combat that eliminate the offensive capability of Japanese carrier aviation. The Hellcat fighter proves itself as the weapon that transforms American carriers from vulnerable targets into dominant instruments of naval power. The pilots who fly these aircraft demonstrate that systematic training can produce competent aviators in quantity, overwhelming elite opponents through numerical and qualitative superiority. The lessons learned from the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot influenced the development of naval aviation for decades. As nations recognize the importance of integrating technology, training, and tactical doctrine, the emphasis on pilot survival through aircraft protection becomes a standard design philosophy. While radar-directed, fighter control establishes standards for fleet air defense, the American victory demonstrates that industrial production capacity combined with technological innovation creates a military superiority that traditional military virtues cannot overcome. The battle remains a testament to democracy's ability to mobilize resources effectively against authoritarian aggression when national survival demands total commitment. The human cost measured in Japanese lives lost during futile attacks against superior American forces represents the essential tragedy of war, where courage cannot overcome material disadvantage. Young Japanese pilots who dreamed of glory defending their homeland instead die in obsolete aircraft, overwhelmed by an enemy they cannot effectively engage. Their sacrifice achieves nothing beyond demonstrating American superiority, while exhausting Japan's remaining reservoir of trained aviators. The survivor's guilt experienced by pilots returning from missions where squadron mates perished becomes a defining characteristic of the final period of Japanese naval aviation. The success of the F6F Hellcat validates the design philosophy that prioritizes pilot survival and consistent performance over exceptional capability that demands exceptional skill. Ordinary American pilots achieve extraordinary results flying aircraft that forgive mistakes while delivering devastating firepower against fragile opponents. The Zero, which demands perfection from its pilots while offering no margin for error, becomes a burden when pilots lack extensive training and combat experience. The difference between design philosophies reflects deeper cultural differences about valuing human life versus achieving military objectives regardless of cost. The Battle of the Philippine Sea marks the end of carrier aviation as a balanced competition between opposing forces with complementary advantages. American technological and training superiority creates conditions where combat becomes execution rather than contest, with results determined even before the engagement begins. The Japanese pilots who take off from their carriers on June 19th fly toward predetermined destruction, lacking any realistic capability to achieve their objectives against prepared American defenses. The turkey shoot metaphor captures this essential imbalance, where one side holds overwhelming advantages that guarantee victory regardless of the enemy's actions. The strategic implications of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot extend throughout the remainder of the Pacific War, as Japan is unable to rebuild carrier aviation capacity before the final defeat. The pilots lost during one morning of combat represent years of investment in training that cannot be replaced by abbreviated programs producing marginally competent replacements. The institutional knowledge accumulated through decades disappears when experienced pilots die without the opportunity to transfer their skills to the next generation. The qualitative collapse becomes irreversible as inexperienced pilots suffer disproportionate losses in subsequent operations, further degrading overall effectiveness. The morning of June 19, 1944, witnesses the destruction of Japanese naval aviation as an effective military force through the systematic demonstration of American superiority. The F6F Hellcat fighter serves as the primary instrument of this victory, combining protective design, powerful armament, and superior performance in an aircraft that ordinary pilots can employ effectively. The integration of radar warning, fighter direction, and coordinated tactics creates a defensive efficiency that overwhelms Japanese attacks regardless of determination or tactical innovation. The battle proves that the arsenal of industrial democracy can produce military superiority through the methodical application of technological and training advantages against traditional military opponents who rely on spiritual factors to overcome material disadvantages. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot enters history as the defining moment when American naval aviation achieved the supremacy that continues through the conclusion of the Pacific War. Japanese carriers that once projected power across the Pacific become floating targets for American aircraft they cannot effectively oppose. The transformation from the vulnerability of Pearl Harbor to the dominance of the Philippine Sea demonstrates democracy's capacity for military regeneration when facing existential threats. The battle remains proof that the arsenal of freedom, properly mobilized and directed, can defeat aggression regardless of initial advantages held by authoritarian opponents who mistake temporary superiority for permanent dominance.